Hey Adventurers, so today is going to be the next batch of my top 100 books of all time. As you may have noticed if you've been following this series, I have done numbers 100 through number 11. So the next one theoretically should be numbers 10 through 1. Yes, I agree, but this is these are the books that should have been on this list, or maybe should have been on this list but I forgot them, and I just have another 10 here. Maybe these shouldn't be on the list, I don't know. Some of them are ones that I actually forgot to put on the list because I wasn't thinking about them. Some of them are ones that I hadn't read yet. Some of them are ones that I took off the list because I wanted to put a different one on and I shouldn't have done that, but whatever, it is what it is now. So let's just go through this list. These are in no particular order, definitely not 10 to 1 or anything like that, but I do have 10 books on the list, so we'll go through them. The first one I have on the list is Alice's Adventures in Wonderland and Through the Looking Glass and What Alice Found There, which are the two Lewis Carroll books about Alice. And it's a duology. I've read both of them now and I absolutely love them. They're fantastic. They're so just fun, whimsy, a little bit creepy, a little bit weird at times, kind of like a fever dream of stories in many ways, and they are dreams it seems like. And I just had a lot of fun with them. Great series, or great two books, very much classic children's literature, although whether or not it should actually be for children is another discussion entirely. But they are, children enjoy them plenty, and so definitely not opposed to letting the children read them. But yeah, so much fun. I really enjoyed these, even with how weird and dark they can be at times. The next one I have listed is Gawain by J.P. Harker. Why this one got forgotten when I was going through this list, I don't know, because I love Arthurian. It's sitting right up there on my shelf behind me, so I should have remembered it, but for some reason I just didn't, or at least didn't think to put it on the list. And I don't know why, but it's here now because I didn't actually want to forget talking about it. Anyways, this is a retelling of the Sir Gawain and the Green Knight story, except in a YA, with a YA frame on it, and it is very much a retelling. It is not the same story. It is a better, at least the term that I've heard used in the Arthurian circles is its own cycle. This is a new cycle of the Gawain tale, and I really enjoy it. It is designed as the first book in a epic fantasy series about the Arthurian mythos. So we've got the first book is about Gawain, then presumably we'll have other books, maybe one about Lancelot, maybe one about Arthur, maybe one about who are some of the other famous knights, Percival, who knows. And I would like to see that. I'd love to see this series continue. This is a smaller author, but when he reached out to me and asked if I'd like to read his book, I said absolutely. It took me longer to get to it than I wanted to, but I do have a review of it now because I actually did enjoy the book quite a bit. So yes, let's move on. Speaking of Arthurian literature, we have Culhwch and Olwen. This is a Welsh tale. It's not a book, it's a couple of pages I had printed off. I had to read this for my Arthurian literature class that I was taking. One of my favorite classes I took for sure. But also this story, Culhwch and Olwen, is it's an old Welsh tale about the King Arthur character, and it is just wild. It is crazy the things that are happening in this book, but it is so much fun, and I just enjoyed it immensely. Very short, very easy, or very fast read because it's so short. But it's a quest. Like the characters have to go on all these adventures to do all these things, slay all these giants, kill all these monsters, whatever it might be, in order to do the tasks that have been assigned to them. And then again, it's all centered around Arthur's court. It's about Arthur's cousin. In some ways, it's about Arthur's cousin. He doesn't have a ton to do in the story, but he does. He does exist, and he does play a role for sure. But it just super fun story. Had a blast with reading it and then discussing it with the class that I was taking. So deserves to be on this list as well. I don't know why it didn't get put on there. Probably because I wasn't thinking about it as a book, but some of these other books aren't really books either. I also put The Adventures of Robin Hood The Merry Adventures of Robin Hood by Howard Pyle on this list. Basically, the Robin Hood story is just like the King Arthur story. It's one of those myths, those legends, whatever you want to call it, that I love just all the time. Every time I see it, I end up enjoying it immensely, even when it's not done well. I just have so much fun with them. But the Robin Hood, this Howard Pyle one is fantastic. Howard Pyle is very easy to read author, classic author, but his retellings of these stories is so much fun, and this is kind of, if you know the Robin Hood stories, this is probably where you know them from, or at least the versions that you know probably come from here, because he kind of compiled the stories and made them his own at the same time. But yes, very much love this book. I also put Uncle Tom's Cabin by Harriet Beecher Stowe on this list because this was another book that I read in when I was in school that absolutely fantastic, very important book and hard to read at times, but it's very, very good. And even if you just read it for the storytelling of it, that alone is fantastic. So another one that I don't have a ton to talk about with it because it's been a lot of years, several years now since I read it, and I can't really remember all the details about the story, but I do remember that I really enjoyed it. Same thing about this next one, which is The Bronze Bow by Elizabeth George Spear. This is a, how do I describe this book? I don't even know. I don't know how you would describe this book, but I really enjoyed this book. It is, let's see, after witnessing his father's crucifixion by Roman soldiers, Daniel Bar-Jamin is fired by a single passion to avenge his father's death by driving Roman legions from the land of Israel. So it's about an Israel. It's about a Jew in Israel who's living under the Roman rule, and it's biblical adjacent in terms of timeline. Like I want to say we see Peter in it at one point and stuff like that, and so it's set around that same time period. And so a time that I'm familiar with due to the Bible and stuff like that, but it's also just a story, and we read the story and it's very enjoyable for that aspect of it as well. The intrigue, the revenge, the mindset that this character has in relation to what's going on in the world at that time. It's so interesting, let's see, the author, I believe, is the author of The Sign of the Beaver and The Witch of Blackbird Pond. So an author who's more famous for some of her other works for sure, but very much enjoyed this one as well. Then I have The Bloodstones by Tori Tekken. This is one that I hadn't read at the time of writing this list, but then I read it and was like, it has to be on here because it just blew me away with how good this was. Tori Tekken is a fellow booktuber, and the other book of hers that I have read is Phased, and I didn't enjoy that one nearly as much as I did The Bloodstones, but I kind of knew that going in that I probably wouldn't because Phased is a very different type of story. It's a very different setting. Not my genre at all. It's not really written for me. But Bloodstones is absolutely, this is high fantasy, it's dark fantasy to some degree, but it's also political. There's so much in this book that works just perfectly for me, and fantastic. Loved this book so much. So it definitely deserves to be on this list. It would probably be up in the somewhere between 20 and 1 if I had read it at the time of writing the list, but since I hadn't, I had to put it on here because it's so good, so much fun. Love this book. Now we're into the last 3 that are on this list, none of which I own physically. I could get access to one of them, but I'm not going to because it would take longer, and I don't want to do that. So anyways, let's get right into the next one I have on this list is actually a series, and that is the Wolves of the Beyond series by Catherine Lasky. So this is the author of the Guardians of Ga'Hoole series, which I believe I already talked about in one of my earlier videos in this series. And I love the Guardians of Ga'Hoole series, and I like a lot about the Wolves of the Beyond series. The reason why it's not higher on this list, as in the actual top 100, is because some of the books do deserve to be up there, and then there's 2, I think it's numbers 3 and 4, I didn't like very much. I had a lot of issues with them, but 1, 2, and 5 I absolutely loved. And so those 3 books for sure would be on the list. And anyways, I love this series. I love following wolf characters and in that same world as the Guardians of Ga'Hoole. Just seeing their own culture, the culture, at least the culture that Lasky was designed and built for these wolf characters. I thought that was really interesting. I thought the way that story progressed was really interesting, and the way that it tied into the Guardians of Ga'Hoole, but also is completely different and separate from that series and doesn't rely on your knowledge and understanding of that world in order to enjoy the Wolves of Beyond. There's also another series set in this world that I haven't read and I want to. Who's it about? Is it about bears? It might be about bears, and I think it is. And maybe someday I will read that one. I would also like to reread Guardians of Ga'Hoole and Wolves of the Beyond at some point. The next one is Kenobi by John Jackson Miller. This is a Star Wars book. This is about Kenobi's time and isolation on Tatooine between the events of Revenge of the Sith and A New Hope. Basically when he's there watching over a young Luke. And the story that happens here, it kind of takes him away from Luke. It kind of takes him out of his own head. It kind of sticks him back into the conflict, except that it doesn't really, because he's still on Tatooine and he stays on Tatooine the entire time, and he doesn't get involved in the events of the outside world, because if he did, he knows that that would compromise his ability to protect Luke. And there's still a story to be told there, and it is about his mental state at that time. It is about his training in the Force. It's very different. It's a very different place for Kenobi to be at than he was in Revenge of the Sith, and than he is in A New Hope. And honestly, had the Kenobi show been a little bit, maybe had been adapted from this book, even if they wanted to add in some of their own things, I think it would have been a much better show, because this book was actually fantastic. And then the last one I have is Sitka by Louis L'Amour. I do have a review of this one, so if you want to know more of my thoughts, I recommend going and watching the review. But basically, I really liked Sitka. This is one that I guess I should mention this as well. I actually had this on this list, on the list in place number 93, and then I replaced it with The War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells, because I forgot that War of the Worlds was one of my favorite books ever, and so I had to throw War of the Worlds on there, and I kicked Sitka off. I should have just put War of the Worlds here in this spot and left Sitka where it was, but that was before I realized that I had a whole bunch of books that I had forgotten about that I wanted to talk about, so that's fine. Sitka, anyways, loved this book. It's a Western, but it's also about a guy who's going back and forth between California and Alaska, and basically smuggling furs, because the Russians in Alaska, who at the time controlled Alaska, didn't want the Americans in Alaska and stuff like that. And just a super interesting story, historically very. As an Alaskan, I understand the history, I understand the locations, even though I've never been to Sitka or anything down there on the Panhandle. I don't know that specific area of Alaska. I do know the world that he's in. Maybe I haven't traveled to those places, but I know Alaska. And the way that it was described, the way that he was existing in Alaska, is so cool to me. I don't know. I just really liked Sitka as well. Again, if it has to do with Alaska, there's a good chance that I will like it. Maybe I shouldn't say again. If it has to do with Alaska, I probably will like it. But the way that this was done, and the way that it was done faithfully, I really enjoyed it just that much more. So that is the books that should have been on this list, but I forgot them, or whatever the other situation might have been. And yes, we will close that out, and we'll move on in the next and final installment for my 2024 update of this series is with my numbers 10 through 1. Thank you guys for watching an Erudite Adventure. Please like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't already, and we will see you guys again soon. Stay well.